There's a trend these days of creating polymer clay veneers, cutting shapes, and making jewelry with them. While that's all well and good, I prefer the idea of elevating these veneers, adding just a bit more detail to turn them into something truly special. Hey there, Sandy here with another polymer clay video at keepsakecrafts.net. Stick around for a set of steps you can follow to transform any veneer into a beautiful piece of art. So this class begins with some kind of veneer or cane or something that you have in your stash already. Here are just a few examples from my own stash. Here's an idea, retro cane. I will link to as many of these as I can find. It has just such a great look. These are colors I love. I have all of my pieces stored in sheets of press and seal. I'll link to a video on that showing how I use it. This way I can just keep them all in a box. Another thing you can do is polymer clay inlay. Crackles are so easy to do, especially with foil. I've done a few videos on crackling, and makumegane is also a lot of fun. You can even combine them, cutting strips of both and putting them together to make a new veneer. So if you don't have enough of any one veneer, or you think maybe what you have is a little boring, you can do a technique like this. Just simply silk screening on clay. This is silk screening on stripy clay, and this is a Bargello technique done using stripy clay. Again, I do have a video on this, but all of these would make beautiful pieces. Most of us love the look of an interesting crackle, and I've done a whole class on different ways of making crackle. And my last example for today is makumegane. In fact, the piece that I'm going to demonstrate today was taken from this makumegane sheet. But go through your stash and pick out pieces that you love and would like to use. And it's okay if they're not solid. You can see this one has the holes through it, and that's just fine because we're going to put it on a backing. The next thing I did after choosing my makumegane was to go through my sets of cutters and pick two that I thought would work well together. One for the outer shape and one to cut out my veneer. So I've settled on this oval, and I've already cut out my makumegane with the oval. This is a cutter from Create-A-Long. And speaking of backing, here is some that I have. I'm making my backings kind of dark. I actually took a blue color that is in here and just added a little bit of black to it. Black polymer clay is very strong, so make sure you add just a tiny bit. But I like the way the color shows behind this piece. This is rolled out on a number 2 on my pasta machine. And now you can texture this. There are so many different cool ways to make textures. I've done videos on just finding textures all around the house. Some of my favorites are this. This is a soap saver that you can find in Walmart for, I think it's like $3 for a package of 2. And this is what a piece of polymer clay looks like, textured with this. Just a really cool, organic, all-over texture. Another thing you can use are acrylic rollers. This one was from the baking aisle at Hobby Lobby. This one is from Jessima Tutorials. I'll have links to all of these. You can see what the basket weave pattern looks like. Getting back to household objects, I just adore using these. These are just big, huge bolts that I found at the Home Depot. They make awesome texture. So before I cut out my main shape, I want to texture this piece. And for this one, I'm actually going to use this more spaced out threaded bolts. And you just roll it across your sheet of clay. Isn't that cool? I love it. You can do perfect square grids. I'm going to do a bit more of a diamond. Yeah, absolutely love it. Oh, another option, which I used on another piece and I absolutely love. This is also from the cake decorating aisle, and it gives a beautiful kind of fabric texture. I love going in the cake decorating aisle and looking for texturing tools. Now that that is textured, I am going to cut out my shape. I'll just use an acrylic roller to make sure. because the edges on these create-along cutters are a little thick. So you want to make sure you get your cutter all the way down to the tile, and I have found the best way to deal with these is to actually peel the excess clay up from around. Then lift up your cutter. There's usually some clay stuck in there, so just make sure you clean it off with a wipe before you use it with a different color of clay. And take a minute and go in with your finger and just nicely smooth and clean up any ragged bits around the edges. If you want, you can add mica powders or such to this. I've decided not to for this tutorial. It's one of those things that's often done. So here, now I'm really loving this combination. However, I wanted to take it just a little bit further. Now this looks okay, but I think it could use just a little something more. I think that that oval piece in the center needs to be framed. So what I have here is just some more of my clay. You could use a different color too. I could use maybe a silver, would look pretty. But I'm going to use the same color. And I'm just going to roll a long skinny log using an acrylic block. Makes sure that your log is the same thickness from side to side. And I'm going to go ahead and use this tool. It's a Marks It. I'll link to this. I'll also link to a video online on YouTube that another polymer clay artist made showing how to make your own Marks Its if you don't want to buy one or you can't find one. I used the little 3mm marks, and now I can cut all these pieces and know they are all the same size. And just roll these into little balls. This is a little bit tedious, but I love the look of all these little balls, so I think it's worth it. Just start placing those around your frame. If you want, you can add a little bit of liquid clay to the clay base here before you put these down, just to be sure you have good adhesion. So there, that's all done. And doesn't that just frame it really nicely, even in clay of the same color with no contrast? It just, I don't know, gives it so much more. Hey there, just me interrupting for a moment to say thank you to my patrons for making this video and all my YouTube videos possible. If it weren't for the support of patrons, I would not still be making these tutorials. So if you love content like this that inspires you in your creativity, consider joining us on Patreon. You'll have the satisfaction of supporting an artist, and there are lots of other perks you can read about at patreon.com/sandyzoen. So this can go in the oven to bake at the manufacturer's recommended time and temperature. I would give it at least 30 minutes. We are going to bake it again though. While that's baking, I'll show you a few other possibilities. This one was made with that inlay technique with the magic transfer paper. I used this sweet little heart cutter from Jessima Designs, and then I used this cutter from a Wilton set. But I wanted to show you a trick that I figured out for making this shape work with this shape, because what I really like about this heart is that this goes in like this. Just has that, I don't know what you call it, but I just like those extra curves in there. Now you'll notice that this one has a border, but it's different, and I'll show you that. Super simple. And this helps us with this technique. So the first thing I'm going to do is use this cutter and just mark where that's going to go. Mark it a little bit more firmly so you can see it. There we go. Now I'm going to center this cutter. And here's a trick. This is a double-sided cutter, so that side's kind of sharp. So I use an acrylic block as an assistant. Now you can see there's a problem here. So what I want to do is use a craft knife to trim away this excess. Oh yeah, just remove that. And then we'll just, I probably should have used my clay blade to do that. Just lift that up and then tuck it in. See there? Nifty. And this will work because we're adding a border around this, so it'll hide, although that seam isn't very visible even as it is. So if you do it just carefully. Preferably evenly on both sides. I probably took a little bit too much off of that edge. But now you have that shape. Isn't that sweet? So that may work in some applications of yours. Your mileage may vary. This one was textured, by the way, this background with this. I just love the look of fabric. Kind of makes me think of a Valentine made with vintage fabrics. As for that border, you may have figured it out already just by looking at it. I used my same trick with the acrylic block to roll a log of clay and then just tucked it in there. So I put the heart on just like I did the oval, and then all you need to do is take a needle tool or an awl or really any tool that will make a mark and make nice even lines all around. And depending on how you space them, you may have the look of stitched rope. You could also use the point. Once you have this part done, then you can bake it, just like the other piece. Here's one more example. I think this might be my favorite of the three, and this is some of that crackle that I showed you. What I used to texture this background was some brass screen. You can find screen like this at your local hardware store, home store. And this one I did color with mica powders because the crackle was colored with mica powder. It was colored with purple to green to blue, and I actually did it in the opposite order for this one. I noticed that my rectangle wasn't trimmed quite perfectly, and so I decided to go with that and exaggerated those angles when I trimmed my background. And this, I hadn't trimmed this quite as much as I wanted, and I trimmed a sliver off, and as I was nudging it off, it just rolled up into a coil, and I said, ha! And a little bit of liquid clay, popped it on there. For this one, I made a built-in bail. Oh, I forgot to show you the bail for the heart. So before we get to that, I'll show you this. Bail for the heart is simply another piece of the pink clay textured the same way as the background, and then another leftover scrap of the inlay technique, and those were cut out with two smaller oval cutters. And then I made the hole in here and the hole in here, and you'll need a nice big jump ring or a few jump rings, maybe a series of 1, 2, 3 jump rings, however you want to hang it. Barbecue skewers are great. They're a perfect size for a bail, so I just wrap that around there before baking. And there you have a really cute matching bail. And I think something like this just elevates this so much more and makes it just so much more interesting. For this one, I cut my strip of black longer than I needed, laid the barbecue skewer here, and just wrapped it around, having this come flush to the tile, and baked it like this. To finish these pieces, you can add some more texture to your backing. So by the way, I don't know if I said, these pieces were rolled on a number 2 on my pasta machine, around 2 millimeters thick. And these ones were rolled on a 4, which is around 1 millimeter, maybe just over 1 millimeter thick. The backing does not need to be quite as thick. Now before you go on with this, I mean, this is great. I think it would look fantastic having any of these done the way they are. But what if we could do something a little bit more with them? I really love doing mixed media, and I adore adding metal embellishments to my pieces. So I was looking at this bit of wire mesh that I used on this piece as a texture, and I thought, wouldn't it be cool if I could incorporate some into the actual piece? And so that is exactly what I did. This is just a bit of the wire mesh. Now this stuff is very stabby. It's really sharp on the edges where it's cut. So you'll have to be careful and take care. But I ended up fashioning this piece that I think will just be so cool and add just so much more interest to this. So the way you do that is you decide how wide and how long you want it to be, and you cut it about 3 times wider and about twice as long. And you'll see why. I have here some metal snips, so I'm just going to use these because I seem to have gotten a little clay on this one. They cut through it beautifully, but these ends are sharp. You may bleed a little. Just warning you. Use a metal ruler. You can use that to do your folding against. This will save your fingers quite a bit. Then use a pair of pliers to really flatten down those folds. This is why we wanted it about 3 times wider so that we can have folds tucked on the inside. Like that. That wasn't too bad. When I did it earlier, it was just stabbing me all over the place. Now these ends are also sharp, so you're going to want them to be buried inside your piece. So this is why it needed to be twice as wide. So we can fold these. And the tricky part, I wanted to get some angles, but I couldn't figure out how to do it without having bits sticking out that were going to stab people. So I ended up not doing it. I just have the square edges. If you have thoughts on just the engineering of that, I'd be interested. So this one's quite a different shape than the other one. But with a little bit of planning, you can get it just how you want it. And then use your pliers and really flatten that down. Now what I have are these ends that are going to be behind here and sandwiched in between this bit of clay and the backing. And that way it will be safe to wear. I think I do like this. I don't know. Which do you like better? The skinny one or the wider one? I think I kind of like this one. I sort of like the putting it like that and just having triangles sticking out. Now you'll notice this has quite a bit of thickness. So what I'm going to do first, I have to flip this over because this is not a symmetrical shape. So I'm first going to cut out just what I need for the backing, because it'll be difficult to do once that wire mesh is in the way. Okay. And this is kind of the cool thing about putting that skewer under there, is just a flat piece of clay with that backing makes the bail perfect. Okay, so there's that. Now let's see. So decide where you want this piece. I'm just going to press it in just to mark it. And this, yep, this is again rolled out on a number 4. It's about the same thickness as this wire. It's maybe just a little thinner, so I maybe could have rolled it out more, but you will get the idea. I'm just going to lay these on here. Move that out of the way for a moment. Flip this whole thing over, and now just trim off the excess. So what I've done is created a channel for my brass screen to hang out in, instead of having a big lump on the back. of our clay pendant. At this point, I'll add some liquid clay to the entire thing. Press in my brass piece, making sure that any of those sharp bits are well inside, so they're going to be buried. And I think I'll add some more liquid clay, especially over where that brass piece is going to be. In fact, I might add a fair bit, so I'll have some good contact. Yeah, I definitely should have made the spacers just a little wider. So take as much time as you need to get it positioned properly, to get it trimmed nicely, and then you can bake it. Yeah, definitely should have, whatever is sandwiched in there in those spaces needs to be the same thickness as what you have in there. And then you'll have a really nice finish on the back. So I'll probably redo this off camera. There, isn't that interesting? And add some kind of very cool chain finish, finding for it. And you have taken that little tiny bit of Crackle and elevated it to something really amazing. All right, so for our heart, we have textured some more of the pink clay for the backing, and I'll flip it over because I'm not certain how symmetrical my trimming is on this. Not perfectly, looking at it. And you'll want to use a clay blade and just trim around it. Because we've modified the shape of the cutter, you can't use your cutter to cut this out. And we want to do this now before we add metal embellishments, because they'll be in the way later. So you make 2 of these, but only one of them needs to be textured on the back. And what I have here are some Steampunk Gears. This one that was cut was also cut with the metal snips. And I like these because I thought they kind of echoed the scallops and shapes on the heart. This was a fun little piece that I made using this Lisa Pavelka steampunk mold. I'll link to this. That's okay, I was actually only going to use it like that anyways. And then, isn't that cute? There's our little bail. Oh, now that's something to keep in mind. You might have to move that out of the way of the bail. In order to make a custom filler for these shapes, this is going to be the middle, the innards. You just leave those in place and trim around them. Now we'll carefully take our little custom gap filler piece, fit that on here, add some liquid clay. Definitely going to press this in so it'll be embedded in there well. Add liquid clay over the whole thing and add the top. And again, take whatever time you need to neaten up those edges. You can also do a little bit of trimming and sanding after baking. I would add some oven-safe glue, such as Polybonder, to attach that gear to the top. Now that you've had a chance to consider these techniques, you'll want to check out the Polymer Clay Veneers playlist I put together for you. It's linked in the upper right.